How strong were the Earthlings during the Android saga? It sounds like a simple question, but it hides one of the biggest distortions in power scaling that the Dragon Ball fandom has ever created. Fans took legitimate moments from the series and built a conclusion on top of them that the series itself denies. So stick with me until the end of the video so you can understand all about it. What's up everyone? How it's going? Welcome back to Dragon Dao. In this analysis, I'll only be considering the manga version, not the anime. The anime often raises the character's level to an absurd degree, so what's true in the anime doesn't reflect the manga's scaling or what's actually true within it. With that said, let's get started. The argument most often used to claim that the Earthlings had become stronger than Frieza after 3 years of training is Piccolo's statement before the time skip. He said that anyone who wasn't confident about the battle ahead shouldn't even bother showing up to fight. So the reasoning goes like this. They had all seen Mecha Frieza's level, they had seen Trunks' level, and they knew the new threat was even stronger than Trunks himself. Therefore, if they showed up to fight, they must have at least surpassed Frieza's level, otherwise they would have been useless. To reinforce this reasoning, people point to the fact that Goku agreed with Chaozu's absence because he wouldn't be able to handle that battle while accepting the presence of the other three. They take this as confirmation that those three had reached that minimum level, which in this case would be Frieza's level. That is the line of reasoning they present. So I'm going to start with the most fundamental point. This line of reasoning completely ignores who these characters are. Seriously, when have these guys ever failed to show up for a fight? When have they ever run away from a challenge or a threat, even when they knew they were completely outmatched? No. They didn't show up to fight the androids because they were necessarily stronger than Frieza. The reason they showed up to fight is because they always had balls. When they found out that Goku was attacking the Red Ribbon headquarters, the most feared military force on the planet, one that even Kama Sennin couldn't defeat, they all immediately set out to help him. Tenshinhan went alone to face King Piccolo, even after watching Chaozu and Kama Sennin die. And even after realizing that the jar for the Mafuba was broken, he still went down there to fight. Yamcha also headed there to help. They showed up to face the Saiyans and died defending Earth. They went to the landing site of Mecha Frieza and King Cold, even though they had absolutely no chance against them. They showed up at the Cell Games, even though they had no chance whatsoever. Since when did they need to be as strong as everyone else to show up for a fight or be useful? The only thing Chaozu's absence proves is that he had fallen behind a long time ago. He lost to Tao Pai Pai at the 23rd tournament, even after training with Master Karin. Meanwhile, Tenshinhan managed to fight evenly with Goku while Goku was wearing weighted clothing, and Kuririn managed to surprise Piccolo a few times. On top of that, Tenshinhan didn't even want Chaozu fighting the Saiyans, even after Chaozu had also trained with Kami-sama and prepared just like everyone else. So imagine Tenshinhan allowing him to go fight the androids. And as for Goku agreeing with Chaozu's absence while accepting the other's presence, did Goku think Yajirobe was stronger than Frieza too? Because Goku got all excited when Yajirobe showed up, thinking he was there to help with the fight. Do you see how these arguments, which always rely on the most absurd kind of power scaling, make absolutely no sense? But let's go back to Piccolo's statement. As always with these absurd interpretations, the context is being completely ignored. Piccolo talked about confidence, but that wasn't just about having enough power. It was also about their mental state. A few hours earlier, Yamcha and Tenshinhan, who had no idea how powerful Frieza was, were terrified just from sensing his ki. And keep in mind, that was Frieza's restrained power, because Gohan said Frieza could become far stronger than that. Piccolo even tore into Yamcha at that moment because he was trembling in fear. Remember what Gohan was like against Nappa at first? He failed to carry out the combined attack with Piccolo and Kuririn because he was also trembling in fear. Having someone like that on the battlefield against the androids would be a problem. That's why Piccolo said he didn't want anyone showing up just to get in the way. When Piccolo talks about confidence to the Earthlings, it would be absurd to interpret that as requiring them to have power at least equal to Frieza's or Trunks. How could he possibly demand something like that from them? Piccolo had been looking down on them since the 23rd tournament, and even though he now treated them as allies and was friendlier toward them, he was fully aware that they were on a much lower level than he and the Saiyans were. We'll discuss Piccolo's post-time skip level in another video. By the time Mecha Frieza arrived, roughly a year had passed since the events on Namek. Piccolo confirmed to Gohan that he was still training hard every single day. But even then, his power was still completely useless against Frieza. So how could Piccolo guarantee that he himself would be up to the task? Was Piccolo really demanding Super Saiyan level power from anyone who showed up to fight? Obviously not. They had all just learned that they would be killed in the future. It was a death sentence. Piccolo told them that anyone who didn't want to believe the story could keep fooling around, but that he was going to train because he didn't want to die. So when Tenshinhan says he wanted to find out how far he could go, and that if he died, he would accept that as his limit, that has nothing to do with surpassing Frieza's level or Trunks. For the Saiyans, the fight against the androids really was about becoming individually powerful enough to defeat them, but for the other Z fighters, not necessarily. It was about doing better than their future counterparts had. That's what they were going to train for, to defy their fates. It's no coincidence that the story says one of Trunks' disadvantages was the fact that he fought alone. When Trunks explains that it was 2 androids against him, Goku asks whether there was anyone who could help him. Considering that aside from Trunks himself, none of the future Z fighters would have had power anywhere close to a Super Saiyan's, why would Goku ask that? Was Goku considering that others, even at a lower level, could still be of some help? Could they provide support for Trunks? It seems so. It's no coincidence that Android 17 said that if they all teamed up against 18, she wouldn't be able to handle them. Anyway, the history and personalities of these characters should be enough to understand why they showed up to fight. But now I'm going to show all the evidence that they were in fact not stronger than Frieza. Since we were talking about confidence, let's start with a piece of evidence that directly addresses it. Goku asks Kuririn why he looks so discouraged, and Kuririn says it's because they were about to fight monsters. So how could he be excited when he wasn't a Super Saiyan? Kuririn's answer alone undermines the argument that everyone who showed up understood the level of the coming battle and was still confident in their power. He openly acknowledged that he was below the level required to face those enemies. Trunks was a Super Saiyan, and he still lost to the androids. So how could Kuririn possibly be confident when in his own words he wasn't even one? We get another relevant statement from Kuririn later, after androids 16, 17, 18, and Cell have appeared. He asks Goku whether he is excited because enemies even stronger than Frieza have shown up. This matters because if Kuririn and the other Earthlings had already surpassed Frieza, that question wouldn't make any sense at all. If everyone had become stronger than Frieza, then enemies being stronger than him would no longer be a particularly meaningful point of comparison. The same pattern appears when Trunks is knocked out by androids 17 and 18. Tenshinhan emphasizes that even the man who killed Frieza was taken down. Killing Frieza is still being treated as an extraordinary achievement that demonstrates how powerful Trunks is. If Tenshinhan himself had already surpassed Frieza, it would be strange for him to use that achievement as such an impressive benchmark. Tenshinhan also describes Vegeta and Piccolo's increases in power as abnormal, and he didn't like that one bit. In other words, he distinguishes their extraordinary growth from his own. But if Tenshinhan had gone from his previous level all the way to surpassing Frieza, his increase would also have been absurdly abnormal. But by his own account, it wasn't. All these statements strongly suggest that Frieza was still an extraordinary benchmark above them, rather than the minimum level they had all already reached. There's also the issue of their training. Kuririn turned down Goku's invitation to train with him and said he would train at his own pace with Kamasenin. Yamcha also turned down the invitation because he wouldn't be able to keep up with their training. Tenshinhan, guess what? He went to train with Chaozu. So tell me, what the hell were these guys supposed to do to break through their limits by training like that? They didn't train under gravity greater than 10 times, and they didn't even train with strong partners. Saying that they trained for 3 years, as though the mere fact of training for any length of time were enough to justify any increase in power, has no basis in Dragon Ball lore. The length of time isn't what makes the difference. Future Gohan trained for 13 years and still couldn't surpass the androids. He barely managed to reach 50% of Android 17's power. Goku trained for 5 years during the transition from the OG phase to the Z phase, and his power barely changed. Tenshinhan's power didn't change much during that period either. What always truly made the difference was starting a new kind of training that pushed them beyond their limits. That's why they always needed new masters to make huge leaps in power. Whenever that happened, they improved far more quickly in short periods of time than they did after years of repeating training they had already grown accustomed to. And that's why Kuririn is impressed by Piccolo's results after those 3 years of training and asks what kind of training he did. Piccolo did what they either couldn't do or refused to do, because they were afraid they wouldn't be able to keep up. There's another interesting piece of evidence that often goes unnoticed. Dr. Gero said he wasn't expecting Goku to make any major leaps in power after the Saiyan saga because of his advancing age. He said this about a Goku who was only 25 years old during the Saiyan saga. If he assumed that not even Goku would become that much stronger after the age of 25, what must he have thought about the human fighters, who were already even older than Goku? The Earthlings didn't have hacks like staying in their physical prime even at an advanced age, Zenkai boosts or Super Saiyan, all all of which could completely bypass Dr. Gero's projections. Do you really believe there's even the slightest possibility that the Earthlings were stronger than Frieza, and that a level like that wouldn't have come as a complete surprise to Dr. Gero? The only ones who truly surprised him with their increases in power were the Saiyans and Piccolo. The Earthlings didn't. Placing the Earthlings somewhere in the tens of thousands, or the hundreds of thousands being generous, fits this theme far better than believing they reached the tens or hundreds of millions, and that this somehow didn't completely surprise Dr. Gero. That simply doesn't make sense within the story. And before I wrap up, I want to talk about Tenshin Han's Shin-Kiko-Ho against Semi-Perfect Cell. I could simply say that it's an inconsistency and that it makes no sense, as many people claim whenever something contradicts their power scaling interpretations. But I don't need to do that, because there's nothing here that contradicts what I've argued. Tenshin Han himself said that he would take the key principles of Kaiosama's training and then refine his own techniques. And that's exactly what he did. So even though he wasn't that strong, he had a special technique that could be extremely useful and could even decide fights, just like several other special techniques. For example, Kuririn could have killed Nappa with the Kienzan if Vegeta hadn't warned him to dodge. Kuririn also not only managed to cut off Frieza's tail with a Kienzan, but forced him to dodge the others, implying that even if it wasn't a surprise attack, the Kienzan could still cut Frieza despite him being dozens of times stronger than Kuririn. The fact that the Kienzan could affect enemies like these doesn't mean that Kuririn himself had the power level needed to affect a stronger opponent. So the same applies to Tenshin Han's Shin-Kiko-Ho. Some people say it's because the Kienzan and the Kiko-Ho have enormous multipliers, but to me, it's simpler than that. They're special techniques, and special techniques have never required equal power to work. I'd rather understand it that way than invent multipliers the series never established. Dragon Ball has power scaling problems, but the solution isn't to invent new ones. The Earthlings showed up to fight the androids simply because they had never cowered in the face of a threat. Confusing courage with power is the mistake that underpins all of this insane power scaling. But now I want to know from you, what do you think about all this? Comment your opinion down below. If this video was interesting to you, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel to keep following discussions like this one. And here on the screen, 2 more videos will appear that I'm sure you'll enjoy. See you in the next video right here on Dragon Dao.